Madam President, thank you very much for taking the time and talking to us today on TVP World.
Thank you.
Now, we've been following this issue quite a bit in the media in Poland and elsewhere, of course, across Europe. And I'd like to just have your own words to describe for me exactly how does this law of foreign influence, why is it such a threat to democracy? And why is it such a threat to Georgia's European ambitions?
Well, it's both, because very clearly it's a law that duplicates the legislation that was gradually installed in Russia, and through which really Russia managed to reduce the civil society to almost nothing and control the media. So that is one thing, that the same wording, the same attitude towards the so that's very important in terms of purely democracy and capacity of the organizations to continue functioning. But what is even more Russian in the spirit of this law is that it treats our partners and our friends of so many years that have supported Georgia all along since the independence as possible agents that want to subvert Georgia, that want to overthrow the government, that have other interest but that of the Georgian people. And it's very interesting that this wording, this narrative is, you can find it in the speech of the honorary president of the Georgian Dream, Mr. Ivanishvili. You can find it yesterday in the speech of the president of the parliament, who accused directly the foreign affairs ministers of 4 countries to be wanting to overthrow the government because they went and joined the young people that protested on the main avenue. So this is something that completely changes the relationship of Georgia towards its friends and towards the country that occupies 20% of our territories, and it's not understandable how we can reverse the values. And so that's the second thing. The third thing, which is as important, is that right now we have had the candidate status in December. We are awaiting, hoping that maybe the accession negotiations could be starting at the end of the year, and we have things to do by then to answer the different recommendations that we have had. And spring session is finishing by end of June. And instead of being working on the main issues, the reforms that we're asked to carry through, none of them has been put on the agenda of the parliament. The parliament is busy working on a law that was rejected last year, that was rejected under the qualification that it was going against the European values, and it was not a European law. All our European partners said that. And they withdrew the law and promised never to put it back on the table. And so we're seeing the authorities using this time that should be used for working on the European projects, and it's used, on the contrary, to throw on the table and to throw on the table of the people a law that they know is more Russian than European, that goes against European values. And in a way, it's a type of also provocation to the society to fuel some more polarization on an issue that was known already since last year, that it was an issue for polarization, because mass demonstrations happened also last year, in March of last year. So all of that creates the very strong impression that the concern of the authorities is not to move towards the European agenda and European integration, but some other concern which is not shared by 80% or 85% of the population.
Right, and I'd like to ask you about that. Is that just a facade that we see? We see European Union flags all around on the government buildings here. It's something I notice as a foreigner coming to Tbilisi.
Well, that was very strongly resented for it's not a facade, it's really the translation of...
By the Georgian Dream Party.
Well, again, the Georgian Dream Party started with inscribing in the constitution that the European integration was a priority, that everybody should be focused upon, all the institutions make all their efforts to pursue this aim. The Georgian Dream Party were the one that earlier on declared that 2024 we should declare our candidacy to the candidate status, which at that time was probably very early because things accelerated only after the Ukraine war, and was pursuing through different reforms the European path. Things changed at one point gradually with the denunciation of the Charles Michel agreement, but when they were changing, it could be explained by the fact that the ruling party didn't want to make certain concessions that could mean a cost for them in terms of power of elections. So the interpretation was not necessarily that it was anti-European, but that it was more to consolidate their own power. It's again after that, and essentially after the Ukraine war, that this departure from the European objective and aim became clearer with the distance taken with European sanctions and the rhetoric that changed, and that rhetoric has been increasing and increasing, anti-Western, anti-European, suspicious of European and other countries' interests. And it suddenly culminated, together with the Russian law, with a speech by Mr. Ivanishvili on April 29, which is a very aggressively anti-Western speech, and it's repeated by most of the Georgian Dream leaders, whether they're in government or in parliament.
Do you think that it's a coincidence that Georgia was given the EU status to negotiate becoming a member back in December, and this law coming up just now?
Coincidence, it is not. Coincidence with what? I mean...
well, with potentially Russian influence trying to keep and steer
well, it's
Georgia
difficult
away.
to say what is a part of Russian influence, what is a part of the local authorities playing in the hands of... but it's clear that at this point in time, between the candidate status and between the opening of possible opening of negotiations, we are in the middle way, and maybe it's a temptation to put some brakes on this process, which has been going faster than anybody would have expected. And it's also clear that now Armenia is in a way not that fast, but also putting itself on the same track. Azerbaijan in a different way, but is getting closer to Turkey. And so the importance of what's happening in the Caucasus and what's happening on the Black Sea, where we see how much focus and central is become, for instance, the Black Sea and Crimea in the war that Russia is launching there. So yes, there are more acute interests, I would say, in the region.
Now, as president, you have 14 days to veto the bill. The bill can be overridden in Parliament.
Will be.
Sorry?
Will be.
Will be, yes, absolutely will be, as we see right now. And the question is, are you going to use these 14 days to try and work out an agreement or make a compromise? Is there a compromise that...
No, why should I make a compromise? This bill was rejected by the population and by our partners, European partners, which are the first interested last year, very strictly, and the authorities took out the bill and promised not to present it again. And they are representing it. It's again rejected by a very large majority of the population, by the Commission, by the European Parliament, and by all our European partners individually. And clearly it's putting an obstacle on our path towards Europe. So I don't think that that is subject to any form of compromise. Why did they present it, and why not withdraw it quietly, calmly, and get back to work on all the other things that they have to do? And clearly, today I had 120 organizations that signed a letter supporting the position that I've taken, that this law is representing per se a different direction for Georgia, is not conform to either democracy or European values. So it cannot be amended. There is no place for small modifications that would suddenly make this law that is anti-European, in essence, into something that will bring us closer to Europe. So no, I'm not going to try these tricks.
Yeah, the only solution is for
the
government
there are
to
many solutions. They can withdraw it, they can pause it, they can change it themselves. And in fact, I had made a proposal before the third reading. I made a public statement saying, why don't you bring it back to second? If you have doubts about this law, and you want, because that's what they are pretending with some Europeans, if you want to amend it a little bit, make it, why don't you bring it back to second reading, which is a formula that exists, and start again discussions in the parliament instead of throwing out the opposition members during the discussions, which also was the case, that the style of the debate on this law was not democratic at all. And the last reading, the answer to my proposal was that they adopted in third reading in the committee in 1 minute and 7 seconds. So. And there are other means. They could delay it. The entry in force could be set back to any time. Since one of the suspicions, strong suspicions, beyond the fact that it's in spirit, it's a Russian law and has nothing to do with the general attitude that we have in this country towards civil society and so on. The other thing that is a concern is that it could touch directly and very effectively and immediately all the organizations that are working on the elections, for observing missions and overseeing the elections. So that is a concern, and that's why I also, in the same briefing, I proposed maybe you can push it back after the elections, 26th of October. And then if the population votes for you and all your legislation, they will choose it. If they choose Europe, that will be without this type of legislation.
European foreign ministers just came here to express, well, their concern, to put it nicely, over this bill. How would you sum up their visit here? Was it successful? Did they influence the government to take pause on this, or were they largely ignored by the government?
They were largely ignored. They were even treated in a not very, I don't know how to qualify that, way, because some didn't receive them. Then they were called different names, again, because they went to see the population that was protesting. They were called to be wanting to overthrow and to meddle in the internal politics and to want to overthrow the government and to be responsible for revolution. They were called even that. So that's also very clear. I mean, there is no sense of dialogue, of trying to take in some of the concerns. That's why I don't believe in the negotiations on this specific law, because it's much larger than the law. There is a sense of Western conspiracy against Georgia that is very un-Georgian in its spirit, that we hear every day. So it's a concern about the whole picture that we have today, and where we don't know. And that's why the protests are so vivid, so large, and continue, because there is this very concern that something, somehow, we're being taken away from our European path.
In your opinion, what is it exactly that the European Union should do in this situation?
I think that it's our situation, and we cannot always expect that somebody else is going to decide for us. That's why I'm taking the lead on a European platform to try to consolidate the parties on one objective, not the union of the parties because that's there, but to show that there are pro-European parties and they're united on a number of reforms that will bring us closer to the accession negotiations, and at least to present that stability for the elections. And I think that what the European Union and our European partners should be doing is to be very clear about what would be the outcome of the election. That if the Georgian population confirms what we all know, that it wants a European future, then we should be promised at a certain stage to restart the negotiations and not to delay too much what is our... If it's not, and anything can still happen, I don't believe it because I think that there is a very deeply entrenched pro-European. But if something were to happen and some other, then it should be said in advance that that would mean the end of this, that, or other. Suspension of the status, of the visa liberalization, but not before, because I don't think that the population should be punished while they're protesting, while they're saying that they want to go ahead, and before they have democratically expressed that they want this European future.
And finally, very briefly, do you believe that the upcoming elections will be the true referendum on this bill and the path that Georgia is going to take?
Not only on this bill, on many other bills, because we cannot get into the details, but it's a whole package, it's a whole attitude, it's a whole rhetoric, so all of that, which is not Europe, and including the way the parliament is working and the one-party system that we have now, which controls most of the institutions, not to say almost all except one, and Europe. So it has to be a referendum. It's not a time for classical elections.
Right. Well, President Salome Zourabachvili, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.